So welcome everyone to our session on leveraging assets. We are joined with people on Zoom and we're live on Facebook as well. So let me just tell you a little bit about Cooperative Housing International. We're one of the 8 sectoral organizations of the International Cooperative Alliance, which is the umbrella organization for all types of cooperatives around the world. And so CHI represents the housing sector. So we promote cooperative housing as an economic and social solution to the problem of providing shelter. We aim to increase the influence of housing cooperatives at the global, regional, and sectoral levels. And housing cooperatives are more important now than ever, more now than ever. And it's by thinking and acting collectively that we can demonstrate the power of the cooperative movement. So our main focus is raising awareness about cooperative housing by promoting its successes on a global level. And we facilitate networking opportunities among existing and upcoming cooperatives via peer-to-peer exchanges, panel discussions, symposiums, and webinars like today. So by highlighting good practices from around the globe and by discussing key issues, we are ensuring that cooperative housing remains an innovative and flexible housing model that is adaptable to local housing needs. So that's CHI in a nutshell. So I'd like to welcome our panelists today. We have Jens Uwe Kohler from Studententorf in Berlin, in Germany. And we have Tiffany DeZita from the Community Land Trust in British Columbia in Canada. And we have Daniel Miller from the North American Students for Cooperation based in Canada and the US. So those are our 3 panelists, and the session will be facilitated by Liz Anderson from NASCO as well, North American Students for Cooperation, and Brel Hutton Okpaleke from NASCO. They'll be facilitating and moderating our panelists, and we'll be fielding questions at the end. So I'll be checking out folks on Facebook, and then for people on Zoom, if you want to put your questions in the chat, or we might invite you to open up your mics, and we'll do that near the end of the session. So I will hand it over to Liz and Brel.
Awesome, thanks, Julie. So to frame the conversation a little bit that we're going to have today, cooperatives have a really unique ability to leverage their assets for the benefit of their current and future members and their broader communities. So we're gathered here today to talk about a variety of different cooperative models that manage assets differently for the shared goal of increasing access to cooperative housing. So our goal today is to share examples and kind of case studies of how different co-ops do asset management as a tool to affect social change and to affect the co-op's mission. So when we're talking about assets, what are co-op assets? That can mean a lot of different things. For the purposes of today's discussion, we are going to be talking about physical assets, land, building, capital assets. Co-op assets can include like members and member time and community programs and really anything that improves the community. But today we're going to be talking about those physical assets specifically. So if you have questions, put them in the chat, save them to the end. We're going to try and get to the Q&A at the end also. But first, we're going to do some short introductions. So I will turn it over to Brel to get, yeah.
All right, thanks, Liz. So we're going to kind of just start with some introductions to both the panelists and their individual programs and projects. So I'll start with Daniel. Daniel, can you give a short background on your co-op, like date founded, location, mission, composition?
Sure. So hi, my name is Daniel Miller. I work with NASCO Properties. NASCO Properties is an organization that has about 250 beds of co-op housing. We do scattered site housing, so we have different partner co-ops that are located in different cities around the United States. So those 250 beds of housing are in 7 different cities around the United States and different parts of the country. We have been around since 1988, and we exist to provide services to those local co-ops. NASCO Properties acts like a co-op of co-ops, where each of the local partner organizations comes together through NASCO Properties and makes joint budgeting decisions and other decisions that affect all of those shared assets across the entire system. So we'll have the ownership centrally coordinated through a national organization, but then the operation of these local co-ops are in the hands of local members. And then they participate in that ownership through their seats on the organization's board.
Thanks, Daniel. Have you had any recent wins or positive developments in NASCO Properties' ability to leverage its assets?
Yeah, so we've had a couple of projects go through recently. We have a few projects that involved expanding into new co-ops. So in Providence, Rhode Island, on the northeast coast of the United States, we recently opened 2 new houses in fall of last year. Those house a total of not quite 20 people. They're just off of Brown University campus. So these are not student-specific housing in this case, but they do serve students in their local community. We've also been in talks with several other smaller independent co-ops that have basically said that they want to come into our organization because they want access to that sort of larger co-op of co-ops and the connections with other co-ops in different parts of the country, as well as access to sort of financial resources and technical assistance that come through our staff.
Thanks. I'd have 2 more questions about this. One of them is simpler. What's the incorporation status of NASCO Properties? So how are you incorporated? What makes up NASCO Properties?
NASCO Properties is incorporated as a nonprofit organization. It is an unusual tax status that basically is there to hold title to real estate and then use the rents that come from that real estate to advance their mission. In our case, that means that we use the revenue that comes from the individual properties to go into a set of shared reserves, and those get used sometimes for repairs or for a rainy day fund if there are other unexpected needs, but also into a fund that we use for developing new co-ops or for assisting co-ops that approach us and want that assistance.
Thank you. And then the last question here is, what are the co-op's current development goals?
For the last few years, our organization has been mostly focused on responding to small independent co-ops that have said that they're concerned about their long-term sustainability as businesses, as cooperative businesses. So we have those folks who are approaching us and saying that they basically are concerned about their lack of sort of group purchasing power, that they don't have enough size as a business to get a bank to talk to them more seriously, or to get better rates at purchasing insurance, to be able to set aside financial reserves because they are both small and often relatively young organizations. So a lot of our board's attention has been focused on these organizations that are approaching us and saying, we've already done this much of the development work. We've managed to purchase a property, or we've founded a local organization and have these grants and this history in our community. But we're concerned that without wider support and access to sort of technical assistance and a deeper pool of money, that those co-ops might find themselves unable to continue moving forward. Either they have a landlord and they might lose their lease, or they've purchased a property, but they're concerned about their ability to maintain and keep paying for that property. So a lot of our attention over the last several years has been attending to these co-ops, because our board has looked at this and said, if these co-ops have already done this much of the work, it's a high priority to make sure that that work that's been done isn't lost if those co-ops do find that they aren't financially sustainable in their current state, or that they are sustainable but lack access to credit that they need to be able to do what they need.
Thank you so much, Daniel. I'm going to move on then to Tiffany and ask kind of the same start out question. Just a little bit of background, your date that you were founded, location, mission, vision, and composition.
Yeah, so the Community Land Trust is a group of societies, and we're registered in BC under the Societies Act. So very similar to what Daniel explained, we are a nonprofit. So one of the distinctions as well as a nonprofit, we're actually not a co-op, but our ownership and our roots are deeply related to the cooperative housing sector. We're actually owned by the Cooperative Housing Federation of BC, which is actually a group of social purpose entities that are made up of member housing co-ops and associated organizations across BC. They not only own the Community Land Trust, but also own Coho Property Management Services Society that delivers management services to housing co-ops across the province. And CHFBC actually incorporated the Community Land Trust as a model for cooperative housing back in 1993, but it was a very passive approach where it was just kind of looking to accept gifted lands and or buildings into a land trust to preserve that housing in perpetuity. It pretty much sat dormant for about 10 years until it accepted 6 properties. And what I refer to as more kind of an absentee landlord-tenant relationship. And it wasn't until probably around 2012 and 2013 where the Cooperative Housing Federation of BC was really kind of looking at a significant kind of gap in the growth of housing co-ops here in British Columbia, and trying to look how to leverage land assets to kind of build a growth vehicle for cooperative housing. And that's when they revisited the land trust model and wanted to really turn that into a real estate development arm of the Federation that could help growth and look at that aggregation of assets of not only in the co-op housing sector, nonprofit sector, and government partners to build more co-ops and nonprofits in the province. So in 2015 is where the Community Land Trust and our group of societies really kind of started to take form in a reorganization and hiring strategy and capacity building role, where we're kind of now landed where we're a nonprofit social real estate developer whose mission is to create, preserve, and steward permanently affordable homes in mixed income communities across BC. And we've been able to kind of focus our growth, the majority with cooperative housing. We've kind of grown from about 500 homes in the past 5 years to about 1,200 homes here in BC, with the majority focused on cooperative housing, and really in infant stages of growth and attracting, like I said, investment for land assets within the sector or through government partners, with another 1,600 homes that are in the development or construction or about to start construction for the delivery of those homes in the next 2 to 3 years. So that's a short kind of background on who we are.
Thank you so much, Tiffany. Are there? I know that you highlighted that you have quite a few like individual homes that you're currently developing. How about like specific recent wins that you've had that you're proud of and excited about that CLT has been able to undertake recently?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, we're in a significant kind of growth stage, and we're starting to now actually see those rewards come in. And this past year, our fiscal year is July 31st. So when I say past year, that's kind of from August to July. We've just added 328 new co-op homes this past year and 62 nonprofit homes as well. We do have a portion of our portfolio that is nonprofit, mainly recognizing that there needs to be a wider base of housing, especially when we're looking at municipal or government land investments, that their priorities may want to focus on different types of tenure. So the land trust model is a tool to be able to deliver on that. We're also excited where we've actually started construction, or will be starting construction in the next couple of months for an additional just over 400 co-op homes and 220 nonprofit homes with a focus on Indigenous communities. We're also one of our operational focuses this past year has really been on community engagement, because as we've got quite an influx of new homes and communities and co-op partners coming on board, we've actually had to take a step back and realize that it's not just about building the assets, it's about building those relationships to manage those assets, and what those relationships mean when we talk about a portfolio and how we all interact, whether that be annual budgets, future reserves for capital replacements or reinvestment, so that we have a sustainable growth model. So very similar to what Daniel was talking about, is that engagement of the people, and how you actually manage those assets from a broader base, rather than just a few select people making decisions based on one property at a time, about creating those linkages of how you're all trying to move forward with the common objective for growing co-op housing.
Thank you so much. I'm going to move then on to Jens with Studentendorf. Jens, would you like to introduce your organization, your relationship with it, and those same kind of questions that I'd asked the other panelists?
Yeah, thank you very much, Bill. Yeah, I'm Jens Buköhler from the Studentendorf Schlachtensee Co-op here in Berlin, Germany. Our co-op was founded in 2002 by ourselves to save our student village here in the southwest of Berlin from destroying or destruction by Berlin government. I need a little bit longer for history. The Studentendorf here, or Students Village here in Schlachtensee, was a gift by American government in 1959 to give German people after World War II and after fascism a new perspective of a democratic way of living, of a way of living together with people from all over the world. And the village should be a place where you can learn all these democratic thinking. So it was built in a special way. It's a kind of democratic buildings and a democratic garden. A lot of people came here and learned a lot of things about a democratic way of living, about living together with all kind of cultures from all over the world. And it becomes a monument in 1991. But in the late 90s in Berlin, nobody thought about looking for housing, because we had a lot of housing here all around. And people came just 10 years after to Berlin. We have now a big problem in housing. And the people who lived here, as well as me, said, no, we want to have you destroy this village. We need these 1,000 these 1,000 rooms for students here in the southwest, in the near of the Free University. It's the biggest student housing project here in Berlin, with 1,000 rooms, in between 900. And we had a strong fight against Berlin government, and we got a lot of help from people all over the city. Architects, monument savers, people who can told us a lot about how to manage buildings, how to manage property, and so we had success, but we had to buy the village from the Berlin government. We had to buy, or we had to pay €4,700,000. We didn't have. We said, okay, we signed the contract. It's the only chance we have. We found a bank who said, okay, when you have to pay, we give you the money. And they were crazy about. And so we got the village in 2004 without any inhabitant. It was empty. It was half destroyed. And we had just one mission: give it back to students, get back students to the village, and renovate all the buildings, reconstruct all the buildings in a wonderful way for also for the monument. So, and yeah, we did it. We have about 900 inhabitants now in our village. We are not the cheapest here on the Berlin market, but it's affordable, and that's our goal. And the next thing is we could invest about 35 million to reconstruct all the buildings. We reconstructed 23,000 of 30,000 square meters gross floor area. And we are really proud of it. We got a really good price last year about the monument protectors. It's the biggest prize for all these people here in Germany. So we are really proud on it. And one thing we did too, we built a new village in the southeast of Berlin with, I think, about 400 rooms for students. So now we have 1,300 places for students here in Berlin with affordable housing. It's not the cheapest, but it's affordable. And now we have status that we have a little bit money. We have a good economic way we found, so we can look for our next goals.
Thank you so much, Jens. I would like to ask then, how is the organization like incorporated? How does that like, are you a cooperative? Are you a nonprofit? How is that set up?
We are a cooperative. We are registered in a normal way here in Germany. We understand ourselves as non-profit, but co-ops here in Germany are not really non-profit organizations. They have to make profit, but €1 is enough. So that's the way we think.
Thank you so much. I'll pass this on then to Liz to ask another few questions to the panelists.
Awesome. So we're going to dig a little bit deeper here and ask the first question. So how does your co-op members relate to the co-op's equity? So how do individual members retain equity or contribute to equity or help control or manage equity? So there's a lot of different ways that members can relate to the equity within their co-op. And so the first person to answer this question will be Daniel.
Well, in our organization, the equity is all held at the nonprofit level. So the members participate in the equity through the nonprofit. There aren't any individuals who take some of that equity with them. We've generally found that this is useful for keeping costs down because members don't have to pay equity in to move in. They don't have to make they don't have to get a loan for the purchase of a share. They also don't have to think about the appreciation or loss of value in that equity during their time there. So in that sense, it acts a lot more like typical rental housing. A member would get approved for membership. They would have a lease. They would pay a deposit, but that is an effective way of keeping the costs fairly low because the cost of deposit less. Typically, this model has let us keep. Sorry.
Oh,
it looks like you.
Okay. So our members typically pay a deposit. They move in. They don't have to take out a share loan, so it's accessible compared to other forms of housing. That deposit is usually lower than other housing in the area. We also have folks who are using that equity to keep prices down over time by taking that equity and using it to make improvements at the local properties. Typically across our organization as a whole, the members are paying somewhere around 60% of the market rates on average across the different areas that they're working. So this model has been pretty good at keeping the cost down. It's also meant that that equity, rather than being taken by individual members as they leave and sort of cycling through, is held by the central organization, which has allowed the board to look more thoughtfully at if there's a property that has higher maintenance needs or needs some sort of intervention, right? They need additional services and assistance at the staffing level. If they have a particularly exciting opportunity to develop a new property, by holding all the equity in one centralized pool, our board's been able to think more critically about sort of where things are going. And then they're able to take these ideas back to their local co-ops and make sure that the members in a local city that they represent understand what's happening and why it's happening in that way. I think that relationship to equity has also meant that because we're located in multiple different cities around the US, our board can look at sort of what different housing markets are doing and respond to that. So if we have an area where we know that the rents are really high, then we can be more thoughtful about adjusting those rents over time to make sure that they aren't getting out of control. We can make sure to slow down the rate of rent increases as much as possible if a local market has very low housing costs. Like Jens was mentioning earlier, that there were times in their co-op's history where the local housing market just wasn't suffering from a lack of affordable housing options. So that is the case in some of the cities where we work. In some of those cities, the issue might be about the condition of the housing, especially in some older US cities, there are a lot of housing units that are in poor condition. And so we've come into different kinds of properties depending on the area where we're working. Holding the equity at the central organization lets people talk about the different needs at their co-ops and sort of come up with what's the most mutually acceptable way to deal with that equity. And that might change from year to year, depending on what the needs of the local housing co-ops are doing.
Awesome. Thank you, Daniel. And so the same question for Tiffany. How do your co-op members relate to equity? How do they control or contribute to that?
Yeah, so since we're not, the Community Land Trust is not a co-op, we're the nonprofit. So we actually have legal relationships with housing co-ops, and those housing co-ops have then their relationship with their members. So very similar to what Daniel is talking about with NASCO, the Community Land Trust holds all of the equity, meaning the land and the assets. And then we have leases with housing cooperatives who then have the relationship with the members. And those members may have to pay a nominal share purchase to be part of that co-op, which would be similar in a rental market, about like a deposit. And those range in our portfolio anywhere from about $1,500 a month up to about, I think the highest that we're looking at now with some new projects coming on board is about $3,000 for some of the larger homes. So when we look at how, and I talked about earlier about that importance of if all of the equity and the assets is held within the land trust, but we have all these partnerships that some of them have invested their land by transferring the land into the land trust for promises of the CLT for massive rehabilitation or redevelopment, or we've built brand new housing co-op communities as well, is that, there's only one source of revenue that needs to support these assets, and that comes from the people that are living there. Therefore, our relationship and how we work together needs to be collaborative. So although the legal holding of all the assets is in the land trust, we do have to work together with our housing co-op partners to establish those annual budgets and where those reserves are and what is the future planning for growth, and making sure that all the individual housing co-ops and properties understand the bigger picture of growth, which comes with challenge as well, because historically the housing co-op sector in BC has been very isolated to one property and one co-op, and not looking collectively as a cooperative amongst cooperatives. So the CLT is kind of the federation's way to kind of link that together with assets and how to get people to kind of think on a broader level for growth. So, that is one of the things that we're marching forward off and drawing those links together to make sure that our housing co-op partners, although from a legal perspective may not have the ultimate decision making, but they are influencing and helping those decisions as well of what not only impacts their individual housing co-op, but the impacts across the entire portfolio. And we are able to pool reserves and resources, whether it be management, group buying, and expertise and capacity that will enable as we're starting to actually realize now that there are efficiencies and economies of scale so that as we build and we develop those economies of scale, that we can put that right back into the housing, and whether that be not just replacing things as they become, the life cycle comes up for renewal, but also how to enhance the physical assets as well, and increase affordability too, because the affordability levels that we're able to achieve right at the very beginning is more along the cost recovery. So it's not as deep as some of the older housing co-ops that have been operating for 30 years. And we get a lot of criticism for that. But our goals are that, over time, that this housing will become more affordable. So a lot of our housing is probably geared towards 80 to 90% of market. So we are below the market in BC or the Vancouver area, but it will only kind of increase over time as we're able to generate those better economies of scale and leveraging the assets on the portfolio.
Awesome, thank you. All right, so next we have Jens talking about Studentendorf. How do your members relate to equity, and how do they control and contribute to it?
Yeah, it's a little bit difficult for us because as we bought the village, we had no inhabitants. So members of our co-op in the moment are just former residents, monument savers. We have just about 110 members. A lot of them paid just 50 euro long ago. So we never dealt with our assets from money from the members. And as we started our to sell our rooms, we had the problem that the market in Berlin was low. So we had a lot of problems to tell people about becoming a member of our co-op. So we just sold the rooms to get money from the rent, to develop our other goals, sell all of our rooms, and reconstruct our buildings. The only really equity we have is our property. It's in the southwest of Berlin, about 40,000 square meters, and around we have a really high price area. So it's the property is now, and we are on the happy side because the market changed in Berlin. So the property is really expensive now, about 60 million euro. And that's why we got a lot of loans from the bank, so that we could renovate our buildings. We will build a new one on the property for about 100 students. And our really important goal is to save the property from, oh, it's so much worse, we have to sell it, to spread out the money to all the people who are in the co-op or something like that. And that's why we made a leasehold with a Swiss foundation. Leasehold for 100 years. So we have to pay a leasehold loan, about 4%. And the Swiss foundation is looking for something like, land could be or should not be a good. It belongs to all people, to all living on Earth, and not to Paul or John or anything else who can sell the property to another one. And that's the thinking of the Swiss foundation. And the next thing we want to make is a leasehold about our other village, and in the long run, hopefully we can take the worth of our properties to make new student house buildings. So a little bit of the rent we take now is something like an investment euro or something like that for future investments. And the next thing is that we want to make our residents our members, but it's a future goal.
I guess I just have one follow-up question of how are you transitioning to the members that are living there to being members? I'm just curious about that.
I think that when you give people responsibility of things, of their own living, then maybe they are interested in. I can tell them maybe you don't have to pay so much rent as now, because when you make things at your own, like cleaning and maintenance in a small way and so on, maybe you don't have to pay 400 euro, maybe you can pay 350. And when I get people responsible for their living, then maybe they are responsible for the whole thing. And then I can solve my other problem, preparation for generation change. And so that's why I was at NASCO 2 times to learn about how your co-ops manage themselves, and to think about that we can change our way of managing things.
Wonderful. Thank you. So I think we have our next question, which is, we'll start again with Daniel. How does your co-op use its assets to accomplish its mission? So I think you've talked about this a little bit, but I also want to know more of the why that you've chosen this path. What led you to use this strategy, or what led your co-ops and your members to use this strategy? And have you considered any other strategies? Has there been any big pivots in your strategy? Has the mission changed over years? Like, what was it? What is it now?
Our organization created the strategy we have now by accident, to be honest. We were originally created in the late 1980s to rescue a co-op that was already established but had a local real estate crisis that was threatening that co-op's continued existence. NASCO Properties was created so that a group of other co-ops could pool their equity, use that equity to assist this local co-op in one city that was having a hard time, leased the property to that local co-op while letting them continue to operate it. So that local co-op got an influx of cash that let them survive the housing market problems, and then got to also continue to operate all of their houses because they leased it from NASCO Properties. So they were able to get the benefits of selling a property without having to shrink by selling off properties. Once that co-op had stabilized and it eventually purchased the property back from NP, and in that process of that local co-op stabilizing, people realized that this one-off model to rescue a local co-op would be useful in using equity in other markets. So pretty quickly, that board back in the 1980s and early 90s started looking at this model and saying, where are there existing co-ops that have leadership and have a vision for what they want to do and have relationships with their local communities, but lack access to either capital or lack access to the sort of technical assistance and know-how that's necessary for getting through this process. So we ended up with this model in a sort of accident, but since then have decided that it works pretty well. And our board thinks a lot about the way that this lets us be responsive and flexible. So we have had years where our local cooperatives have said, actually, we think that we should really be looking at a quieter year. We're really looking to restabilize what we're doing here. We're not really interested in taking on an expansion project. We've also seen this pretty commonly with student housing co-ops, where we're talking to other organizations and they're saying, well, we're based in this college town. We serve this market of students. They need to be in a certain area for this housing to really work for them. And there just aren't properties for sale, or it's not, the legal environment's very difficult for us to do development work. So our organization has this flexibility in saying, well, maybe in this area, it's not the year to do a project, but in another area, we're hearing from groups saying that they want to be doing expansion, they want to be joining our organization, so we can respond to where the conditions are right or where the local energy and enthusiasm is going to make things happen. We've also found that this gives us other kinds of sort of psychological flexibility. Organizations that we talk to doing other kinds of co-op housing say that aside from whether they're the right properties or the right locations or the right price, that their members may just have other things that they're focusing on right then, but that that doesn't mean that members wouldn't benefit from a co-op being there 5 years from now. So in some cases, this has also meant our board can look at these things and say, I don't need to wonder whether I want to live in this new property, but I do need to ask whether another person would want to live in this property. Is there a market for a co-op in this place? And so they're able to sort of give themselves a little bit more distance from that decision, and say, okay, we see that there is a group that is doing community organizing and wants cooperative housing in this area, and we can be part of that and help them. It's also meant that we've had a flexibility in what models of housing we offer. Most of the housing we offer is a group residential situation. It looks a lot like student housing co-ops. So you might have a large house with 20 bedrooms and a large shared kitchen, acts like a rooming house. We also have apartment co-ops. We also have co-ops that are set up more like single family residences. And we've had early talks with groups that are doing manufactured housing co-ops or single family housing co-ops that are interested in other models. And our boards looked at those things and said, yeah, actually, we think that because of this relationship, if that's what works in that local area, then we can work with that group. So it's meant that they can think about this more flexibly. It's also meant that those local groups are able to come up with their own ways of doing things that work for their conditions. And often they're creating ideas that work really well elsewhere. So a lot of what our board of directors is doing when they come together and meet and bring representatives from all of these co-ops together is to get a sense of what is working or not working at those local co-ops. And you get like a cross-pollination. They're borrowing ideas from one another because they're operating far enough apart, hundreds of miles apart from one another. So they don't have a lot of direct contact other than through the central organization. It means that they're able to come up with unique solutions. Often people can learn from them. So we find that that works fairly well. I think it also means that those local co-ops can make their own decisions about whether they want to hire their own local staff and have that person do different work than what NASCO Properties does. And I think another advantage to this approach to using equity is like what Tiffany mentioned earlier, that our budgets are structured in a way that we want to make sure when a new co-op comes into the organization that its rents are affordable, but like with both Jens and Tiffany's examples, they may not be the most affordable right away. They will be below market, but they might not be as far below market as we hope. But they're designed to become more affordable over time. We actually have a policy saying that we need the affirmative approval of a local co-op for the lease to adjust by anything more than inflation. So effectively, our rents stay the same or go down over time when adjusting for inflation, unless one of the local co-ops says, actually, we would like you to approve a rent increase on our co-op so that you can do this with the money. So we have had groups that said, we want more maintenance funding or funding to hire local staff. So increase the rents on this property so that the funding is there to do this. Unless they ask for that, the assumption is that the rates have to stay at or below inflation, so they become more affordable over time. And at various points, we've mapped this out and been able to show our members that, look, the rents this year are 10% more affordable than they were 5 years ago, and it's because of this model. So we have the pool of equity growing and more available to use in other projects, but we also have the rents going down over time.
Awesome. And I have one slight clarification question. So you mentioned how things have been changing over time, but has your organization's mission changed at all over time, or has that been the consistent?
It's been pretty consistent. I think there are a few adjustments that have been made. Originally, the organization was founded with a focus on student housing specifically. I think at the time that the organization was founded, this model of housing of a group of people sharing a residence was almost only used by students. What we've seen in the years since then is that more and more non-student organizations approach us and say, we want to structure our housing just like that, but we're not explicitly for students. Students are welcome to live here. We might have a university in the area, but it's not our primary focus. Our primary focus is on being affordable housing for anybody in the community. So I think that the one real change is that the student-specific parts of the mission Now we say that we will work with students, but we work with other populations as well. And a little over half of our total membership is non-student specific co-ops. I think the only other thing that's adjusted a bit over time is that we have had periods where our board has said, we don't have an immediate idea of what we want to do with our equity, and we don't have a pipeline of who is approaching us right now. And none of the co-ops that are represented here in the organization are looking to take on a project, but we have equity available and we want to see it go to use. And so we'll publish a request for proposals every few years when that happens, to say, we have this, we have $100,000 in equity that we plan to use towards a project. Come and talk to us about why your project is where we should be investing this money. And then also making clear that, this isn't a grant, this is, we're asking for organizations that want to join our organization and be a part of this work. So to make sure that this is something that they understand the relationship that they're signing up for. And then that's also given our board some flexibility to say, these are our specific goals for the use of this equity. Our goal is to have the most units of housing created, or housing that is the most physically accessible, or housing that serves a specific market. So our board has made different decisions at different versions of publishing a request for proposals. At other times, we have not published a request for proposals because we already knew which projects were in the pipeline. Those groups had been approaching us without us having to invite them to.
Awesome. Thank you for clarifying that, Daniel. Great. So we're going to move on to Tiffany. How does the Community Land Trust use its assets to accomplish its mission? And why has it chosen this path? Have there been changes in your mission over time?
Yeah, well, maybe I'll start with the mission. Because of its origins, we really, as I explained earlier, really started with its mission to just acquire and preserve. So that was just accepting assets and preserving existing housing. The big shift that we had that happened, in about 2015, was really to turn it into the growth vehicle for cooperative housing, which was about create housing and then steward the housing as well, which when we refer to steward, that is really managing the asset itself and our partner relationships. And so that was really kind of the big shift, to kind of look at how do you add to the Community Land Trust model for growth and stewardship. And then looking at the co-op housing sector in BC and that disaggregation of the assets and how to pool so that you can use those assets to attract growth and investment. So since we're fairly new, we're not really seeing how to leverage the assets yet because we're building up our asset base. But what you're seeing is that the model and the capacity and that we're building is attracting those assets, so municipal land partners or existing housing co-ops. They're investing their assets and transferring them into the Community Land Trust so that we can get new housing units to the market and people that desperately need housing in BC. We also have what we have been able to, when I talk about land transfers we do have an older housing co-op that was transferred in to the Community Land Trust. And we did go through a comprehensive rehabilitation of about $5.5 million into 94 homes. That little asset itself, when you kind of just look at it on a small scale and what you would be able to do on a larger scale with the portfolio, that one small little property of 94 homes, we were actually able to leverage the operating stream from there to increase our borrowing power of approximately $2.5 million. That $2.5 million brought in working capital equity that is very much needed in British Columbia to put forward a growth agenda for new housing. It takes a lot of money to get a project through municipal approvals, designing them until we get to that point for construction financing. So that one little property is what has been able to deliver this growth pipeline, or not solely, but it is part of the working capital that is needed for these 1,600 homes that we have under construction and development. So you can see how one small property, and then as the portfolio gets bigger, of how you're going to be able to access additional equity, being working capital, to build more, or reinvest into the portfolio for initiatives, whether it be community enhancement, building enhancements, improvements, replacement, etc. So why was this strategy kind of chosen is, the Cooperative Housing Federation of BC just saw a complete stop of growth of co-op housing, from the early 1990s. And realized that most of the cooperative housing was built through past government programs. So instead of relying on senior governments to actually grow the co-op housing sector, how to take control of that themselves and build that growth model, and turning it not just to acquire and preserve, but create and steward. So that's why that strategy was chosen. And our mission, since kind of about 2015 has been pretty stable by adding that create and steward component into it. But our business plan will probably continually shift, because growth equals change. And the two will go hand in hand. So like I said, we're at the infant stages of a really growth spurt. And then our next kind of phase will be completing what our promise is for these 1,600 homes to bring them on board. And then re-looking at a sustainable growth model moving forward, and utilizing the portfolio, the assets that we have built up, and to continually build into that pipeline, but also strategically look at it as well. Not every opportunity is appropriate for the land trust, and we're not appropriate for every partner that's looking for growth either. But we need to kind of explore those opportunities to see if our mission's aligned and that we can deliver on each other's objectives. So that's when I talk about, moving forward, once we can deliver on our current development plans, that we'll be looking at more long-range growth sustainability of not just the existing portfolio, but attracting new investments and assets.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tiffany. Next, we have Jens talking about how Studentendorf uses their assets to accomplish their mission, and the why. Why was this the path that was chosen? What led you this direction?
Yeah, thanks, Liz. Our mission was really clear: save or protect the monument and keep the place for student living, for student housing. The problem was to know the steps. As you may have seen, I'm studied German literature, and to learn that working calculation is nice as a poem of Whitman was a long way for me, and also to learn about managing real estate with all these problems in maintenance, in cleaning, and so on. We tried a lot of different ways. And came out to the solution that the best way is to working with own people, with own workers. So we have cleaning staff, we have maintenance staff, we have about 35 people working in the co-op. So that's a big responsibility you have for people as a board of the member of the board. Sorry. And the next step was to learn about the houses, about the buildings, how they work, how they can work in the future. The old model was we have buildings where can live about 25 to 30 people in, with 2 or 3 kitchens. And the kitchens are the real point in these buildings, to have their groups, to have people who can talk together, who can cook together, who can learn things about other people, who can learn together maybe. And we wanna save these kitchens, but we know that common bathrooms for 20 people, you can't save for the next for the next 100 years. So we had to think about how to reconstruct these buildings, and it's not an easy way. How to reconstruct these buildings in an affordable way, The first two houses we reconstruct were at 750,000 euro. The last building we did, we had to pay about 1,200,000 euro for reconstruction. Just 25 rooms in this building, and in the way we thought about these, how to reconstruct these buildings, the next way was how to find the money to reconstruct. And so we had to get one step by step to fill them, or to fill the mission. And now we are on a way we can think about how to refound our next steps, because our first steps, our first mission we solved. We had saved our monument, and we saved these places for student housing, and but it's always you have to learn, and you have to make the next step in a better way. You have to learn again, and yeah. But the mission was clear. Just to find the right way.
So new mission is pending, is what it sounds like. Awesome. And I think we're a little ahead of time, so we might have time for one more question, but I'll pass it over to Brel.
Yeah. Hello. I'll be asking our last question that we have pre-prepared for our panelists, since it looks like we're a little ahead of time. And that question is more about kind of your view on your model, which then is, do you believe that this way that you're currently managing your assets and leveraging your assets is the best way for you to be doing so at this time? And why or why not? And I'll start that out with Daniel.
I think our members are committed to this model because, I mean, so for one, it's pretty wired into our structure. It would be pretty difficult for us to work in a different way without a lot of reincorporation and a lot of legal difficulty. So we have a lot of relationships with different lenders around the United States. Changing the structure of the organization would be a big project. So part of it, I think, is members looking at this and saying, we're not, there are no problems with this model that are anywhere near worth the cost that would come with trying to change it. But I think are also genuinely attracted to this model because of the way that it allows them flexibility in their local co-ops. We see a lot of those co-ops taking advantage of that in positive ways, right? They are hiring local staff. They're coming up with their own interpretation of what it means to have affordable cooperative housing in their area. They have their own ideas about what values and culture they want to create within that environment, how they want to build relationships. So I think the fact that there is this intentionally hands-off relationship where there's an organization that where the staff for the organization might be hundreds or thousands of miles away from the properties where people live. So they are able to ask for support, but they know that there's not a sort of unwelcome level of interaction because of that distance and because of the structure of the organization. There are some challenges that come with that. I think in particular, if we're looking at either doing development and expanding into an area where we're not already working, that comes with a lot of challenges to build relationships with local lenders, to figure out who are the sort of political actors that we need to have relationships with. What are the local laws and regulations on housing? How are inspections going to happen? Those things vary a lot from place to place. So it's a big challenge for us to move into a new area because we have to do so much of this work over again. We also, because of that, really prioritize working with groups that have a vision and leadership and are doing work in their local communities already, but lack access to that technical assistance and the capital. So usually we're looking for groups that have cooperation already being practiced in some way. They might be leasing a property, they may have purchased the property but need help making that sustainable. They may even just be individually living separately, but coming together to do community events in certain ways in order to build support for what they're doing. So we really do, when we're looking in a new area, try and prioritize groups that already bring some of those connections and see those as the assets that they are bringing. And then we're bringing assets in the form of, basically access to capital, lender relationships, technical assistance. But a lot of the cooperation and the human assets that are being created locally, those are what we're looking for when we're expanding somewhere. That the model assumes that we want those groups to have an identity and that we're helping them make their goals possible. I think otherwise we're pretty committed to this model because of the flexibility that it gives. And that over time, the pool of equity available for these properties has been growing. It's also meant that over time, we've been able to be strategic about what properties we have debt attached to and what properties we don't, so that we can think about which properties we can use in the future as leverage to be able to go and take out another loan. So again, that flexibility of knowing that, we own real estate in a city where it's very valuable and there's no debt attached to it. And that because of that, we can respond to where somebody else does have that local leadership, but doesn't have access to these resources.
Thank you, Daniel. I'll ask the same question to Tiffany. Why or why not do you think that this is the best way for you to be managing your assets right now?
Yeah, I would probably answer that question and say it's the best way for us now and today, because really mainly focused on our growth and attracting investment, where we've had basically a lull in co-op housing for the better part of 2 decades. But as we look forward into the future, and I also see a question just up in the chat, and that really kind of comes into how we might look at our model advancing in the future as well, because geographically we may be within the same province of BC and not across the entire country, but we have different funding and financing models and different programs because we've had a significant investment from our provincial and national federal government into housing that all come with different strings attached to it. And so our current model and to manage the assets has really been to secure the assets. And then how are we going to manage those moving forward and balancing all of these other different, I call them levers, right? Through different legal relationships. And not every property is the same in how it's funded and whether or not it might come with a subsidy to deliver deep affordability to a select number of co-op members. So it does become a little bit more challenging. And also as we're building into more urban areas, our buildings aren't just housing. They're coming with market retail space. They're coming with social purpose community spaces. So there's also going to be a balance and a challenge of trying to mesh different uses within our portfolio of assets as well. So, I could say as our model today has been very good at attracting those investments, how we might pivot as we move forward into the future and learn from our partners and feedback on how things are happening on the ground and as they build their communities when we talk about the people asset component and meshing that with the physical assets. And I might actually be reaching out to Daniel to kind of talk about how do you build back more in that autonomy back into the housing co-ops, because the CLT is very hands-on in the beginning of management of the finance, the debt services, the property management, the asset management. But how do we build back in that autonomy that makes housing co-ops so great? And what is that approach and that phased approach that we look at, so that we might look at stepping back and be more at the high level of the portfolio and allow the individual communities to have a little bit more autonomy over that management component. So if I kind of look forward into the future, that's probably where we're kind of going to look next, about how we kind of bring in more the on-ground co-op level into our model versus being very hands-on and top-heavy down. So that's kind of where I see us now and where we're kind of moving in the future.
Thanks so much, Tiffany. And Jens, same question.
Yep, I would say currently yes, because we were successful, but I think in the moment we have our founder generation managing everything, and especially for me, Student Village in Schlachtensee is my heart and my blood. To find people who have this way of thinking, we have to change some things. And so our next goals are more participation of our residents, to have people who live here to give us a better feedback, to manage the co-op more in the way of the needs of the people who live here. So that's the thing. And another way is to find more properties to build new co-op housing or student housing, to invest the money we have on a strong way now in new housing, to get more affordable housing into the city, or maybe into other cities in Germany as well. But it's really difficult in the moment because we had so much like a price race on properties in the last years. We had a development about more than 100% on property prices here in Berlin, especially. So it's not so easy. And but to take the things we got, to invest, to give more people a possibility to live in an affordable housing. The next thing is that we try to give our experiences to people who are on the same place as we 20 years ago. So we have a place in the north of Berlin. There was a youth school of GDR. It's a monument too. And Berlin government don't know what to do with it. And there are people who want to make a new thing, a co-op, and to make small things and develop it step by step. And we want to try to give them experience, a little bit of money that they can move a little bit. So as we got help from other people, we want to help now with our experiences. And yeah, these are our goals now.
Thank you so much, Jens. I'm going to move us on into our Q&A session. There are already some questions in the chat. And Julie is also looking at the Facebook questions that are here. And I'll let Julie take over for this Q&A session.
Thanks, Brel. So I'll list the questions in order as they appeared. So we have a question from Denise on, so in Canada, there's regional co-op housing federations, and she's asking, like, outside of BC and Quebec, which are federations that are doing development, could these federations take on the role of development of housing co-ops in their areas, knowing that, it costs, lots of money for working capital, and the federations have limited assets and resources. So maybe Tiffany, you can take this question, seeing as it's applicable to Canada.
Yeah, so I mean, I think that's one of the reasons why the local federation here in British Columbia developed a real estate arm, which was to basically attract investment, whether it be land assets or new ways to fund housing co-ops. We're often seen as people kind of a polite way to put it is that when funders look at building new housing co-ops, they look at the community land trust that's supported by a federation of housing co-ops, that from a risk perspective, we're with paid staff that are there to manage the development process, the finances, and the asset management. They're willing to lend into that. Part of that lending program includes what we refer to as pre-development funding, which is the working capital to get some of these projects off the ground. So that's the way that the federation out here in BC has been able to, kind of attract what I would call cash equity and borrowing power that would allow us to have growth. And there was also a question in there about like credit unions. So Van City, which is a credit union and a co-op, has been instrumental in seed funding for the Community Land Trust for our capacity building, but has also been instrumental with some of the acquisitions of distressed assets that we've, when I talked about being able to leverage that for additional funding for working capital, that has helped to be able to facilitate that as well, because we're part of their mission as well, and what we're trying to deliver. So I'm not sure if that answers the question directly, but that's kind of the BC kind of context of about how a federation was able to create a development entity to not only attract investments for working capital and pre-development funding, but acquire assets through acquisition or transfers.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Tiffany. And yeah, thanks for answering that question about the credit unions. I was about to reply to that. So there's a question from Barry Pinsky from Rooftops International about, are there any legal or financial risks to leveraging assets from one housing co-op to finance others? And then also, like, how does that mesh with government programs, that provide the subsidies? And, so there might be some restrictions, within those programs. So I think, I don't know, Tiffany, if you want to take this one on as well.
Yeah, I guess, I mean, each project has to be looked at individually. I mean, you don't, if those are familiar with financing terms like debt to service ratios, you need to find balance as well and understand your asset with its affordability needs. So like, where do the rents or housing charges need to be, but also making sure that that building and asset can function not only in the short term, but in the long term, as part of that long-term planning of the asset. And then kind of looking at like, where is its debt to service ratio? Does it have no debt, or does it have minimal debt? Can we borrow a little bit more? And and how do you leverage that and then port it over into like the CLT group to be utilized across the properties? The other aspect that we look at in BC, when we look at investors coming in, especially on brand new properties, to isolate risk, especially on brand new developments. Like, our new developments are quite large. We're talking ranging from 50 million to 150 million to deliver on one building. And that's not including land, that's just the actual hard costs. So there's a lot of risk that kind of goes into there, and then looking at the other assets within the portfolio and what is their risk factor. So we've actually been able to kind of take something from the private sector where they use numbered companies, but we create individual nonprofit societies that somewhat provide a level when projects are in their most risk stage of development and construction, before there's any revenue and people living in there, that it's not, it can't be affected. Someone can be affected, but there's a little bit of a web to get to it. But the risk is that somebody is only financing that one property, and it's isolated from the rest of the portfolio. As we mature and get out of those risk stages and the projects become more stabilized, which is probably a brand new building might not become stabilized, at least for a decade, till you get past your kind of first term of your debt servicing, and you stabilize out a bit about kind of how does the building functioning, and holding up. Then you can start to consolidate those a little bit more. But we've used these individual nonprofit societies to isolate risk for investors and funders, and then really kind of manage, we've only had the one property that we've been able to leverage for additional debt. And we didn't maximize what we could. We used a conservative approach, knowing that we still had lots of flexibility if there was all of a sudden just say a catastrophic roof failure on that property, that we were sufficiently funded to still manage that asset, even though we had leveraged its borrowing power for other projects.
Super, thanks, Tiffany. That's a great idea to create a a numbered nonprofit. So there's a question from, or a couple questions from Joshua, I think directed to Daniel. So he says, you've mentioned that members pay into a development fund. So what portion of the rent does that tend to be? And does everyone pay the same amount? And when you talk about keeping rent the same or low, does that include this piece?
So at the central level, NASCO Properties does budget that the lease revenue from each local partner co-op is enough to cover all of their local costs and also contribute a percentage into shared reserves. That includes reserves that can be used towards development and also reserves for emergency maintenance that's not covered by their standard annual maintenance budget. So yes, the total amount that the members pay stays below market and also includes those various development funds. We do have some of the local co-ops have additional services to members beyond sort of just the shelter that they live in. And so if they, have meals provided, if they have, a on-site bike shop or a photo lab or something, we've seen examples like that over time. They may choose that, like, they'll set aside local budgets for those amenities or services, and that those aren't counted as the revenue that NASCO Properties takes in. If local members decide that they want to set up a local program and decide that's in their best interests, then they have the freedom to do that. We do set some minimum levels that get put in towards reserves. So it's a certain percentage of the lease charges that are going in. And as far as whether everybody is paying the same amount, they do pay in as a percentage. We definitely have wrestled a little bit over time with how to deal with shared financial decision-making when people are in really different housing markets. So some of the places we work have, I think, much lower housing costs in, dollar for dollar than other places where we work. So some of the places we work are, Austin, Texas, or Chicago, Illinois, where the housing markets are fairly expensive and they're fairly large cities. And then we might work in a, small college town in rural Ohio, where the local housing costs are very low by comparison. So we have usually set these as percentages so that it's, whatever percentage of the local rates people are paying, and then it translates a bit better from one place to another.
Thanks, Daniel. So there's another question from Joshua, part 2. Is so if someone approaches you to start a new co-op, how much of it are you paying for? If they have a certain amount of equity available, then is that used? And if so, does that equity transfer to you over time? Because you mentioned that you own all of the equity.
I will echo, I think, some of what Tiffany was saying in terms of how you leverage in one place to work in another. So typically, if we're taking on a new development project and working with a new group, we will have to get some sort of approval, either from a lender that we need to take money from to do that local project, or we have relationships with other lenders. Even if we had, no need for their help in a project because they've participated to a certain extent, they want the right to review our future projects to make sure that they don't endanger our ability to pay back existing loans. So we have these relationships with lenders. They want to see that whatever project we take on is independently sustainable, right? Even if the rest of the organization didn't exist, I can show that this project is able to pay its own way. That's also, I mentioned earlier that we have some policies about how rents adjust over time. We also have policies saying that we can't raise rates in one location to fund development in another. Unless that's something that the members actively say that they want, we assume that the local project needs to be independently financially sustainable through its access to NASCO Properties. So maybe they wouldn't locally be able to have staff because they only can come up with $10,000 a year, and that's not enough to hire somebody with the background that they need. But that $10,000 a year might be enough to pay for a portion of a person's time shared across multiple co-ops. So that it doesn't have to change the numbers that they're working with locally, but those numbers need to pay their own way. And then over time, those co-ops are all becoming more affordable. As far as how the equity is being used and how it's being handled, usually the way that we talk about this relationship with co-ops that are interested in joining is to say, you could retain equity, right? If you have let's say a co-op has $1 million building, they only owe $500,000 on it. So therefore they owe $500,000 and they have $500,000 in equity. If that co-op was looking at saying like, we'd like to talk about transferring our assets into NASCO Properties and being part of this larger organization, we would talk to them and say, look, if there's a reason why you want to transfer title to the building for $700,000 instead of $500,000, and you would keep the other 200 and you'd use it for something, that's fine. But NASCO Properties is then going to have to show that the revenue from your co-op is sustaining the $700,000 number and not the $500,000 number. So if you transfer your equity in, then you can keep those member rates as low as possible and then still have a voice in how that equity is used through your representation at NASCO Properties. If the local co-op said, we hear all of that, but you know what, actually we'll trade the ongoing higher rents that members would be paying in the future for having this hypothetical $200,000 now because we have something we really want to do with it, then that's a conversation that the co-ops can have, and our board would have that with them, and the model still functions. Most co-ops look at that and say, we still have a vote in how this equity is used, and it can be used more flexibly then we can use it. And also we will have ongoing lower rents in the future. That's how most co-ops choose to handle this. And so they usually choose, having looked at the range of options, they choose to transfer their equity and basically donate it to the larger organization because they think that larger organization can use the equity more quickly to make more co-ops happen.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Daniel. So there's a question on Facebook from Gunbrit, who is from Sweden. And so she asked, do you plan to have saving schemes for future residents? So I know in Sweden, HSB, which is a CHI member, they use an equity model of cooperative housing. So people, buy the right to occupy a unit in a co-op, so they're not renting. So people can put money aside, they can save up, like let's say they're, like you're 21 and you think, okay, well, by the time I'm 31, I want to move into a housing co-op. So they start saving. So that gives you access to, that gives the co-op organization access to that capital. So, she's just kind of throwing it out there as, is this something that anyone has contemplated doing? Tiffany.
Yeah, it's something we have contemplated. We call it the housing continuum. Everything from shelter to an ownership model, and how if we can look at ways to actually build more types of housing on that housing continuum that you have. As you can maybe move somebody from more of a rental kind of traditional housing co-op model into maybe a shared equity model that is still below market. But it frees up space as well that they were taking in these more affordable housing tenures. So we are exploring this with a property that we own for part of our third phase. It also is an opportunity that will inject equity into future builds. So equity as in cash for investment from a part of our growth plans. We're just in the exploratory phases with that. There's a lot more regulatory requirements with who will actually fund these things, provide mortgages to, than we ever actually thought. We actually recently found out there's actually nobody in British Columbia that will give a mortgage to a traditional equity housing co-op. We have laws that tend to lean towards what we refer to as apartment corporations, which was a legal mechanism for multifamily prior to entering into our Strata Property Act in the early to mid 1980s. So we're actually challenged with regards to, unless you just kind of look at it like here's one house or one unit, for a shared equity model about how do you, if we're going to do it, we want to be able to do it on scale, and something that might provide another type of housing tenure as part of our growth agenda. So we're just exploring this in British Columbia and how to move forward on this one site that we have. And hopefully there could be some exciting news to kind of add this to our cooperative tenure as part of the community land trust model in kind of the next year. Because we need to make some fairly quick decisions on this land asset, because it's going to be sitting there empty, and we don't want it sitting there empty when we're in the middle of a housing crisis. So this coming year, you'll probably see some information coming out from us about how we might be able to get into that shared equity model, and what it means in today's world versus what people might have looked at it 20 or 30 years ago. Because our financing world has changed quite dramatically with regards to how to build this type of tenure versus it was more, I guess, widely spread or widely utilized tenure a few decades ago.
Great, thank you, Tiffany. I know in Quebec they're developing some housing co-ops that are shared equity model as well. I'm afraid this is the end of our session. We fielded most of the questions. I think we have a lot of people who've offered up some suggestions and comments on how things are done in the UK. And so if you want to have a look at the chat, but I'd like to take this opportunity to thank our panelists, Jens in Berlin, and Tiffany in Vancouver, and Daniel. Where are you, Daniel? I'm not sure where you are. I know you're in the US.
I'm calling from San Antonio, Texas.
In Texas, San Antonio. And then our facilitators, Liz Anderson. I don't know where you are either. You're in the US. And Brel, I know where you are. You're in Madison, Wisconsin. Because we did a podcast on our podcast series, Co-op Conversations, that I invite you to check out, and we'll be adding some more to that. It's just conversations with people living in housing co-ops, just to give folks a bit of an idea of what it's like to live in a housing co-op, to grow up in one, to raise a family in one. So so check it out wherever you listen to your podcasts, Co-op Conversations, little plug there. And thanks everyone who joined us on Zoom and on our Facebook Live. We are recording the session, so we'll make it available. Just watch out for our social media, both from NASCO and CHI. We'll let you know when that's available, and we'll have it on our website also. And I invite our guests and panelists to stay on for a little bit of a debrief afterwards for a couple minutes. So for folks who are listening in, this is it for now. Thanks very much. Hope you learned a lot of some new insights, and that you'll be able to share wherever you're working or living. And yeah, that's it.